No matter what you think your duties are, there's a pecking order of the royal family. And Meghan saw it as more Disney princess than, dutiful royal. It isn't tiaras and ballrooms and celebrities and big state openings. It is actually opening a civic centre on a cold, wet Saturday afternoon in Kettering. People still love Harry. They still like him. Problem is, they don't like the woman he loves.
Hi, I'm Matt Wilkinson, the Sun's royal editor, and welcome to our show Royal Exclusive. With me in the studio today is PR commentator Mark Borkowski and news.com.au royal reporter Bronte Coy. We have a lot to talk about, so let's jump right in. Mark, I'm going to start with you, OK? We're going to talk about ruined royal reputations and what people need to do about it. There was a very brutal article in the Hollywood Reporter this week. It was a brutal takedown of Harry and Meghan. It claimed to have quotes from members of their staff. I'll read just to start. I'll read some of it. They have a staff member who says, "Everyone's terrified of Meghan. She belittles people. She doesn't take advice. They're both poor decision makers. They change their minds frequently. Harry is a very, very charming person, but he's very much an enabler and she's just terrible." As a PR executive, those kind of things must terrify you if they come out about one of your clients. But why do you think it's gone so badly wrong for Harry and Meghan? Have they lost Hollywood?
Yes, I think they probably have lost Hollywood. And one thing about Hollywood is that it's a home of corporate entertainment, the world of the business of show. And it's a small community. And once you're out, you're out. And that's why, PR is knee-deep in the heart of Beverly Hills. And some of my should we say, friends who are in that sort of line of work in that part of the world will say our job is to protect our clients from themselves. And it's a brutal world. And I think there was a huge outpouring of sort of embracing the idea that you had these maverick royals with all their glamour coming to Hollywood. But there's only so far that you can sort of operate with a bleeding heart, talking all the time about, your distance and the way the royal family's treated you and all those sort of things. And then sooner or later, that seemed to be the continual narrative. It never changed. But the biggest problem, I think, for them is many of their ventures have not worked. And they haven't worked in such a way that became news. The Netflix deals, the podcasts, the content or whatever, it just didn't work. And there's only so many interviews you can actually do Oprah style. So if you don't have the currency and if you are perceived to be negative and you've got your inner sanctum, your staff, reflecting what a lot of professionals clearly can see, that there is poor judgment. There's a sense of hubris. There's a sense of sort of we're caught in this ghetto, we're defending ourselves. Then you lose your power. I mean, Hollywood is also about making money. You have to make a lot of money. They need to make a lot of money because they're cut off from the source. So if there's no positivity, if there's no smiles, if there's just sort of this angst that sort of covers their brand, then it becomes unwound. And it takes an important trade publication like the Hollywood Reporter to actually tip the first domino, and you'll gradually see more dominoes fall.
The Sun is holding a special live edition of Royal Exclusive, and you can be in the audience. Much-loved royal photographer Arthur Edwards.
When I went up to get my medal at the palace, I walked forward. She said, "I can't believe I'm giving you this." So she pinned the medal on me.
And TV legend Jenny Bond.
I do miss him. I mean, Harry was the most popular royal, wasn't he, a few years ago? And having watched him grow up and known him just a little bit, he was a wonderful little boy.
Will be joining me, Matt Wilkinson, for an unforgettable night rich with never-heard-before stories from the past 4 decades. Find out what's really going on with Meghan and Harry and behind the walls of Buckingham Palace to what the future of the royal family is going to look like. We'll be diving into the latest royal news and giving you the inside scoop on everything you need to know. Plus, you'll have the chance to ask our expert panel your burning questions. This is your opportunity to get the answers. Don't miss it. Can you pinpoint or pick out any major errors that you've seen the couple make or that their couple's team make since they've left the UK to live in the USA?
I think that if you look back at the amount of positivity that exists, they were called the Fab Four with Kate and William. But I think it stems from the fact that no matter what you think your duties are, there's a pecking order to the royal family, and they're not in line, for that top job. It isn't. It's more. I think Meghan saw it as more Disney princess than dutiful royal. It isn't tiaras and ballrooms and celebrities and big state openings. It is actually opening a civic centre on a cold, wet Saturday afternoon in Kettering. It's a job. And I think that was the first thing that came apart. And you've got some uber defensive, sort of kids. William and Harry, had a brutal upbringing. I mean, I remember that the funeral, watching these two young boys, stand behind and walk behind that coffin with teams of random strangers who were started throwing flowers at it. I mean, that's indelibly marked. And then the reception of actually not being super friendly to the press, coming down from their father. So here they are falling in love, and both have found it difficult to find relationships, particularly Harry. Because, a lot of women in this country know what the job is. They're not going to sort of, give their life away for public duty. So, detaching in such a public way, and then I think it was a catalogue of, errors, really, in terms of sort of doing that interview with Oprah started with, and then opening their lives, Spare the book, the documentary and whatever. Their mistake was they didn't have critical friends around them. If you look at people who manage their reputation, they've got people around them who are going to deliver the bad news. You can't get it right, and you certainly can't be in some hubristic bubble. And I think that they stuck together, they clung together, self-defensive around each other, and didn't take advice. And so I think it became a catalogue of these things. They overpromised on a lot of their products that they were going to bring. They were going to bring a load of allowed commentary in about their success. And it started off being, this disruptive brand is going to set up this, this well-meaning foundation. They're going to do this great work. It was overhyped, overpromised. And when you overpromise and then underdeliver, then you become the story. And there's a feeding frenzy around the negativity. There was never any positivity, and they were always compared because, in a sense, I think the American media didn't have the same perspective as the UK media, who very much saw him being pulled away from the heart and the bosom of this country. They had their own sort of royalty. It was again these a lot of young people in America actually sort of saying, well, why can't they live their life? They're in love together, happily married and whatever. And of course, they had to drive because they were in maybe not a premeditated PR war, but they were actually cast in that role. And they were trying to outdo, an organisation, of the royal household, who have been through so many, and at the time the Queen was still alive, giving that advice. And she was a wise woman who understood the old world of legacy media, maybe not of the modern day comms, but it was never complain, never explain. They had reinvented themselves post Diana. If you think of the turmoil they had when Charles was with Camilla and accepting Camilla back into a divorced woman back into the hold, all those sort of things they'd run through. And so these disruptive souls who were going to somehow, be bigger than the royal family themselves, that was their mistake.
I mean, when we go through mistakes, I think the first mistake was the Oprah Winfrey interview, which you mentioned earlier. That was them just being incredibly angry. And then the more that they've told their story, or the more that they've put their side across, that they've become less popular over the time.
I think it was more to the fact that their popularity certainly diminished in this territory and possibly around the Commonwealth, if that's the expression, but not in America. I think there was a golden moment where they could have built on the sort of idea that America had brought these people into the centre of their attention.
Can I ask you about that? Just on that, before we move on with the Oprah interview, I always wonder about this because it was about a year or so after they'd left royal life. We know from Harry himself that that's not how he wanted to leave. He wanted half in, half out. So this life that they had, they didn't have a very clear strategy. And there was a lot of noise around them this was really their first chance to speak for themselves. And we know how it's played out now, but at the time, is there a way they could have done that interview and sort of presented themselves better, I suppose, to the public? Could that have been a better PR operation than what it was?
No, no, they couldn't, because you're doing a deal, and you as a journalist will know you want the thing that is talked about across the world. You want the eyeballs, you want the clickbait around it. And, of course, you are talking to probably one of the most famous interviewers in modern television history. There's no control over it. You've done a deal, and you think you are in control, but you're not. And that was a big mistake, that it was so explosive. And, the lessons are there. The lessons surely were there about the mistakes that Diana made, giving the Bashir interview. There were mistakes in recent history, in sort of Andrew, giving the Makeless interview. They should think, well, how do we do this? Less is more. The Queen understood, and I don't think her way of actually, running the media in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, was disrupted with Diana, but she knew the power. And do you remember, which I think is one of the greatest statements about post that interview, about, opinions, what was it, may differ? It was such a short, brilliantly crafted thing, and that's a quality of advice at the highest level, coming also from a woman who probably, kept the establishment together from years and years of sitting on that throne and understanding how to get that balance. And it was their desperation to tell their story. They were wounded, not just by, obviously a very difficult life, and I think mistakes were made by the royal family, particularly around Meghan's father, who was left bare for newspapers to exploit him. So there was a narrative running on that, he wasn't going to turn up at the wedding or whatever. It was just a catalogue of soap opera, uncontrolled moments. And I think that just as Diana landed and actually gradually, causes cataclysmic change in the way that comms worked at the heart of the palace, so Meghan was there as well. And I think that they underestimated just the sort of power of that negativity too. So there's a dual effort in that of actually not getting it right.
And the underestimation as well, one of the things that struck me during that period is that, Harry, for example, would make criticism of William, and it was quite shocking as the moment it would be delivered, for example, when he spoke about their physical fight. But also Harry, especially in his book, talked about, and Meghan famously talked about being silenced and not being able to hit back at these things that they felt were potentially unfair or overly critical. And so after that had sort of sat for a bit, these criticisms, it was that feeling of empathy towards members of the royal family who, by Harry's own admission, couldn't publicly respond to what was being said about them. And I think that Harry and Meghan probably underestimated that public sentiment of, well, you feel bad for the people that can't do their Oprah interview and can't write their book.
What's happened to whatever this new jam brand that she's bringing out? I mean, how ridiculous is that? What does she want to be? The next sort of Martha Stewart? Are you telling me when he's sitting in his Montesino sort of palace, lying in his hammock, not thinking how much he's missing? All he's doing is trying to knock on a bolted door that will never reopen for him.
One of the other things in this article, Meghan was described as Duchess Difficult, which I think she's a dictator in high heels walking around barking orders. Do you think that is fair description of Meghan? Or I'm just asking you, as women working in business, this is a trope that is often used against, loud, powerful, strong women.
I'm glad you've asked it that way too, because that's the filter through which I try to read these things, especially about Meghan. Women in leadership positions and positions of power, society has form of coming down on them and judging them differently to men in a lot of instances. So reading this latest Hollywood Reporter article, but also having read the ones that have come before it, like the Times one that came out in 2021, the problem I think that Meghan has here, yes, there is, setting boundaries and being clear, which is how she's described her behaviour. That's one thing. The problem is that there's phrases that are being used as a uniformity to this. There's reduced people to tears. That's something that's been said more than once now, and by UK press and the US press, who the US press doesn't seem to have any sort of role in this narrative that Harry and Meghan have said, which is that, the UK media was against them. So
Well, yeah, the reducing the tiers, the Times article, which then led to a palace investigation into allegations of bullying, that was often seen as a palace smear, or it was seen as the nasty UK press. But now we have a situation where 4 years after moving to the United States, the same stories are coming out from staff or from newspapers working with
that sort of ready-to-wear excuse. I mean, we don't know exactly what happened. The palace investigation hasn't been made public. We don't know what's happened. But what we do know is that this article came out a few years back. Another one has now come out, and it's from a different team. It's from a different side of the world with a different, they can't use that same sort of example of, oh, well, it's a smear campaign. It's the British press conspiring against us. You have to then look at it and think, well, there isn't an obvious agenda here. So the fact that they do mirror a lot of the same comments says that there hasn't been a lot of self-reflection from Harry and Meghan in terms of their employees and how they run their business. And I think that's going to be a problem ongoing.
I mean, it goes further than that as well, doesn't it? I mean, if you think of when Harry was up for that, the Pat Tillman Award, his mother, the NFL star who died in the fighting for the USA, his mother said that Harry was divisive and controversial. We had the Spotify boss calling them effing grifters. We had the South Park episode, the Worldwide Privacy Tour. I mean, they're constantly being damaged in America by large media groups and comments that are going to stick around.
I think it heralds, not a great time. Look, they had to raise a lot of money. I mean, Harry had his money from his mother's side, as it were. But the lifestyle. If you remember the documentary, there was that scene where they were sitting back and they had escaped this attention on the private jet.
It's the Freedom Flight.
Flight to freedom. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, and people looking at it thinking, look at where I'm living, look at what I'm doing, look how I'm doing. That was hubristic to me. That was an absolute, give an example in a programme they supposedly had some sort of control on, that actually really expressed how they were so far away from reality as far as I was concerned. So I think that what I've discovered over the year is authenticity is absolutely the most important. What you are is, you can't sort of re-engineer something if the soul of you actually is opposed to how you project yourself in public. And you've got an ultra-defensive people. It's them against the world, them against one of those powerful families in the world with all the attributes that they have to hurt them. So I think that this sort of hurt, those constant narratives that seem to flood out, start to sort of show that actually there's something that isn't right there, that all the various rumours are starting to sort of come out to actually be true.
Well, we've spoken about what we think they've done wrong and the reaction in the UK and the reaction in America, the growing amount of criticism. As a very well-respected PR man, how do they turn this around? Are there any steps that you can recommend, or any things that you think that they need to do differently to get their reputation back on track? Well,
they just have to look at the history of the royal family. If you think about the Annals Horribilis, they took on board the fact that you've got to get the best people around you, and you've got to accept some tough advice. And if you haven't got a team, haven't got a central person who's sense-checking you, you're going to make the same mistakes all over again. It's a definition of sort of, a lunacy, really. So I think that the first thing, robust team, and actually turning to that team and actually recognising we've made mistakes, and they've got to find themselves a critical friend that is actually going to make some tough decisions on their behalf. They've got to step out of that bubble. They've got to step out of that deep ghetto they're in and recognise that everything they've done today has got to be torn up and they're going to start again. Look, the good news is for anybody who's hit the downturn, the great audience out there, have got short-term memory loss and long-term amnesia. It seems to be they're focusing on the next disaster. So you can rebuild yourself with authenticity. Focus on the things that really matter. The Invictus Games is a fantastic and a real thing that Harry's put him into. I mean, create some sort of distance between two, and then starting gradually to look at the various circles of sort of people, influencers, close and close to the royal family, who can do it. And somehow he's got to make peace with his brother.
Well, that's the key element, isn't it? I mean, William's going to be king one day.
That's going to take a long journey. You're not going to do that straight away. You've got to sort of prove, you've got to find that sort of level. And I think that there are indications that they recognise that they're in a last chance saloon. This article in Hollywood Reporter is very, very damaging, and it's filtered around the world. But it's a very slow process. But they cannot carry on doing the same things. What's happened to whatever this new jam brand that she's bringing out. I mean, how ridiculous is that? What does she want to be? The next sort of Martha Stewart? I think that, you see desperation slipping in now, and that should be an indication to say, let's start again and learn, indeed, from the royal family post-Diana. How they brought in some of the best people. Paddy Harverson, remarkable person who shape-shifted the whole comms business. Bring people in who know their stuff and build a team out of that, rather than getting yes people to do what you want, backed up by some Rottweiler of a lawyer who's going to send out letters to every last person. It's the way they're doing about it is akin to sort of trying to brand snow in a hailstorm.
It does feel like there have been movements in the right direction, I think. And you said patience there. That's such a good way of putting it as well, because I think that they seem to be really results-driven in that first year or two. I kind of sort of conflate it with, when you go through a breakup and you're trying to prove to your ex that you're fine. They got to the US and they wanted to say, hey, we can do this on our own. And I think this year, really since earlier in the year when Harry flew over to see his dad when he heard he had cancer, from the things that Harry said, from the fact that his book is being released in paperback, I think it's next month, and he's not adding anything to it, things like that. I think there's signs that perhaps they're learning these lessons, perhaps, and that's their plan moving forward, is to sort of now stay the course and look toward reconciliation and a bit more peace.
Well, yeah, their plan, as we understand it, is that they're not going to say any more. They're not going to criticise the royal family anymore. They're not going to talk about William and the King, and because that was hugely damaging to their brand, because they come across as this moaning couple. As you pointed out earlier, that they've got this wonderful life out there. Stop moaning. They're trying not to moan. They're just trying to look positive. I think it's look to the future and look at all the positives and look at all the great work that they've achieved over the year with their trip to Colombia and Invictus Games coming out and stuff like that. So they're trying to get rid of this. We're this angry couple shouting insults and we're moaning, to being a more respectful couple, talking about positivity and positive plans for the future. And
they seem really good at it. When they're out, you just mentioned Colombia, you see them, and Harry at the Invictus Games, they're actually very good when they're deployed effectively. It's just been that there's been a lot of directions they've gone in the last few years that are quite negative. But when they're focusing on things they care about, I think they can do a lot of good.
The issue is, I think, I'll say something radical here. I think if you think people still love Harry, they still like him. That's the problem.
Yep.
Problem is, they don't like the woman he loves.
I don't think that's radical. I don't think that's controversial. I think I speak to people and it's very much the same. Harry is still Diana's son. As I say, you talked about the walking behind the coffin. Mothers still remember, I'm sure, we all still remember the funeral where he walked behind Diana's coffin, that heartbroken little boy. We still kind of care for him, but we'd never really got to know Meghan. I mean, how long was she here for?
So they dated, I think it was 18 months from when we found out about her relationship with Harry to them getting married, and then she was in the royal family for less than 2 years. So, as you say, Harry is so loved here. He was Britain's favourite son. He was their cheeky son, so popular. And it's only really been a few years, it feels like a lot longer, but it's only really been a few years since he left. But I think people still hold that great affection for him, but they never really knew her. They didn't even know her as a royal, really. It was such a short period.
There was a lot of outpouring of love for her, because they felt he found someone fairly late in life in terms of how royals, sort of get married off. So I think, it was in her hands to develop that. But of course, when you come from Hollywood, you come from the star system, when you come from, making sure that you're absolutely on the red carpet for X, Y, and Z, make sure you've actually got your table in restaurants, you're actually seen and thereabouts, they were not the premier act. And actually, in some ways, where spare was turned out of as, oh, poor me, I was the spare, I was, bullied by my brother, all this sort of this nonsense. Actually, being a spare in some ways was a huge advantage for him. And I think with the, the diagnosis about the illness of the king, you've got, the sort of treatment that Kate was going through. Actually, the royal family needed Harry. It slimmed down. And I think that's became a glaring, a missing cog in this very important royal machine. I think that reflected back to him. He must have been sitting there thinking, well, God, if I hadn't done all this, I'd be centre stage.
It's interesting you raised that about the outpouring of love earlier for Meghan, because I was on the Australian tour with Harry and Meghan. You cannot imagine a more rock star welcome for anyone short of the Queen, the late Queen. It was the love that was there for her, particularly because she announced that she was pregnant while she was there. I think it was the next day or even later, that first day. The outpouring of love, the crowds that were there, and of all ages. It was unbelievable, the buzz around them for that entire trip. She was very loved in that period, but again, it was just such a short period that people didn't really get the chance to hold that long-term affection that may see them bounce back.
In many ways, you were talking about, plans, ways that they can turn it around. They're looking for the adulation by going to Colombia, by going to Nigeria and having lots of screaming people like you had in Australia. They're going on these trips, these foreign trips. They're copying what they did in the royal family to maybe get that kind of love and adulation, maybe.
Well, look, if you think of Africa and you look at the problems the royal family face over the next 20 years, it is the empire legacy. It is the Commonwealth. You've got countries like Australia, you've got various places in Africa who don't want to be reminded of the colonial past. And here is, Meghan with her heritage that actually is a fantastic communicator for a modern royal family. The problem the royal family have got, in which actually I think that's why Meghan and Harry were needed, is how do you relate to Gen Zs and millennials? The boomers have grown up with it and they've got that inbuilt sort of conditioning about it. You look at the average sort of Gen Z kid who's worried about the world and what's happening to it. They're looking at this and saying, I don't have any relationship with it. And that's what actually, funnily enough, I think William and Kate, particularly trying to assimilate in terms of what will the monarchy be. Charles is really standing in, for a period of time and actually harvesting the last of the Elizabethan age. So what will it mean to the people? And actually the youth that they have. If he goes on for a few years, William can come in to the throne in his 60s. That isn't a very modern thing. So therefore, their children, both Meghan and Harry's children, and also clearly George and the rest of them, Kate, are really important to this institution. And when it's slimmed down, let's not forget, it's a job. It might have all the glamour, but it's really hard work. Do you really want to be it? You're damned if you do something, you're damned if you don't. You are constantly, sort of under the microscope to be looked at. People look at it and don't realise just how difficult it is, just how toxic that fame connected with it is. And I think that's why I think Harry took so long in actually finding Meghan, because he had a lot of girlfriends beforehand, British, who actually understood what it was to be.
And they went, we don't want anything.
We don't want
anything to do.
And who can blame them?
Yeah.
And then can blame them. So not someone who didn't know and absolutely jumped at the opportunity because she could be the sort of, the Disney princess, as I said.
Is it too late, Bronte? Do you think it's too late for we hear these rumours that, I'm told it's not true, but there's constant rumours. Front pages of the Times and the Mail on Sunday this year have said that Harry's been reaching back to his old friends. Is there a possibility for redemption for the couple to come back?
So bearing in mind, as you say, it seems so highly unlikely that anything permanent or full-time would ever happen, because Meghan surely would never come back and live in Britain.
She's gone. Yeah.
So and they're married and they're together, so that's not likely. But with that said, if it ever happened that he did need to, win back favour with the British public, I can see it happening. Like you said, there's a lot of affection. People have watched him his whole life. I think there are ways back. I think it's staying the course. I think it's that patience you've mentioned. I think it's finding the things that give him purpose and that he's really good at, like Invictus Games, and sticking with that. For Meghan, I think that anything's possible. It would be a long rehabilitation, though.
I think never, ever underestimate surprise. You never underestimate what could actually happen. If you think, I'm old enough to remember, the media and the sort of conversation at the time rejecting the very idea that Camilla could be queen, rejecting the idea that, and actually, time goes on and getting on with real work, keeping your head below the parapet, gradually there is acceptance and values, obviously change around that. You just don't know. I think the future of the royal family now remain in the kids now, that generation coming through to a certain extent. But who knows what can happen, and who knows, if they can, rehabilitate. But this man, Harry, has been conditioned for his job of being the spare. Are you telling me when he's sitting in his Montesino sort of palace, lying in his hammock, not thinking how much he's missing? I think it was been incredibly difficult for him not to be able to wear the ceremonial military stuff. It must be so hurtful for him. He clearly loves this woman, and and undoubtedly she loves him. But that this rift is deep, but who knows what can bring them together.
One thing I've learned from reporting on royals for the last 4 or 5 years is you never know what's going to happen. Anything can happen.
It's in life, generally.
Yeah. Now, I did go to Archwell before we filmed this, and I asked them for a response to the Hollywood Reporter article. Now, they say that the quotes are fabricated and don't make sense. Of course, they would say that because they're extremely critical. And current staffers say that the term Duchess Difficult has never been used. Another source from Archwell, who wants to remain anonymous, has said that, and I quote, "These quotes were fabricated by someone lacking knowledge of our company. The Duke and Duchess work from Montecito and we're based in Hollywood. They likely think that we're all in the same office and this quote would fly, but the circumstances don't even allow for it. If she's marching around and barking orders, no Archwell employee could factually claim that. It's total nonsense," the source says. And regarding the claims that Meghan fires off angry 5 a.m. emails, this staffer says, "Who hasn't sent an email when they can't sleep or are awake early? I've never once gotten an email from either of them at that hour. And even if I did, the Duchess specifically notes in her email signature that everyone has a different working day and not to feel obligated to respond outside of normal business hours." They add, "These source quotes don't make any sense." Now, on background, we understand that on the Duchess's email signature, she writes, "My working day may not be your working day. Please do not feel obligated to reply to this email outside your normal working hours." That is a response from Archwell to the claims made in the Hollywood Reporter article. Right, we need to move on. Harry's birthday.
Yes.
I didn't get an invite. It seems that he went to Tyler Perry's 55th birthday. He was an old friend, a Hollywood pal who gave him a mansion to live in a few years ago. Oprah was there. I think the bosses of Paramount were there. He went to a party on Saturday night, a quiet day with the family on Sunday, and then went away with friends for the Sunday evening. They went hiking. Do you think he's happy turning 40? What do you think about these birthday celebrations?
Is anybody happy for it? I passed it. I'm sure you two haven't, but no, it's tough.
There's just such a tale of two Harrys at the moment. I think more so than ever before in the last few weeks. It's hard to know which it is. It depends what you're reading. Either Harry is never happier than he is right now. He's completely content as a father and in the work that he's doing, or he's reaching out to his old acquaintances back in the UK and trying to find a way back into the fold and is desperately missing aspects of his life here. I think the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. I hope he's happy. I know that he always said that he wanted to be a dad, and now he has 2 kids, and I'm sure that is something that's giving him a lot of joy now. But the other side of it is he has talked about how he lost a lot of friends through this process, and birthdays, particularly milestone birthdays, are such a point of reflection. It is absolutely the case that he would have reflected at some point on his 40th of the fact that he's not surrounded by the friends that he had from his school days, or these people that he knew that knew him so well for so many decades. The fact that he's not speaking to his brother, that he's, has tension with his father. It is sad. I think he's got some joy there, but it's milestone birthdays and occasions like this are always the ones that put it into sharp focus. And the fact that he had such a small a small celebration over there. It really just puts it all into very sharp focus where everything's at.
It was entirely different to his 30th birthday when I think William and Catherine threw a big party at Clarence House. I mean, that over those 10 years, so much has...
With all his old friends. And he just launched Invictus Games. Back then he was sort of riding high and he'd found purpose, which again is something at the moment that I think he's grappling with. So, yeah, it's quite sad.
Now, another royal who needs a bit of PR help is Prince Andrew. So I've been lucky enough to watch these 2 episodes, or the mini-series that depicts... It's a dramatisation of when Emily Maitlis from Newsnight interviewed Andrew. And it's personally, it should come out on Halloween. I mean, it's like a horror movie. It's just like a complete and utter takedown of Prince Andrew, just when he thought it couldn't get worse for the interview that he gave and the ridiculous excuses that he presented. He's completely pulled apart. He's played as very pompous, arrogant, childish. And I'm just wondering from you two where Andrew can go with his tattered... Is there anywhere he can go?
Can I ask you, though, from your position, obviously having worked with the palace in terms of, contacting them for stories, etc., how do you think they feel about this second Andrew story coming out? Because these have been on the boil. There was this one and Scoop, and they were on the boil for so long. We knew they were coming. They're now both released. This one has been the first part released. But knowing what you know about the inner workings of the palace, how do you think they're reacting to this one?
Well, they treat a lot of these things with just a shrug, whether it's a book, whether it's Spare or the whole Netflix series. They're just like, well, there's always something. There's always another television programme. But I think with this one, there isn't a person on the world that doesn't know that Andrew's been cast out of the royal family over allegations of Virginia Giuffre and Jeffrey Epstein. There's not a person that doesn't know that he said... I was at a Pizza Express on that day for a birthday, or and I don't sweat. Everybody knows, but what it does, it just piles more and more and more pressure more scandal onto the royal family, worldwide scandal, and it damages their reputation. It's just that's what Charles is trying to do at the moment. He's trying to lever him out of Royal Lodge to just make him go away. But yeah, as you point out, Netflix and now Amazon. It proves that it's not going to go away. There'll probably be another dramatisation in the future. But
I don't think it pours any more pressure on Royal Family's reputation. I think that was covered so well, and they dealt with him by pushing him out. He's a non-person now. I mean, he's nowhere connected to it. And every time he tries to knock on the door to come back and wear his medals and whatever, he's immediately put away. They've taken a very aggressive attitude to actually distance him. And I think it's about him now. He is the brand. He's no longer in people's perception of Windsor. They've closed down the family, and I think this is just more of the same. I get a feeling that I haven't watched it. You have. We're bored with it. We know what happens. We've had loads of stuff on it. He didn't choose his fans really well. All the stuff you're describing, people have known about him for years. And when he had pitch at the palace, actually he did a lot of good for startup businesses and whatever. He again, that's what he was bred to do. Only he was never going to get to the heights, of power. But he did use it well. But he's nowhere. He's gone.
Where do you think he should go?
I really don't think that causes any headaches for our family any longer.
Where do you think... What would you do with Prince Andrew? What should he do? He can't give another interview, can he?
There was absolutely no way that anybody would go anywhere near Prince Andrew. There's nothing to redeem there, and particularly when he's been ejected. I think, he just needs to just carry on playing golf and driving his cars around the estate and whatever and keeping it. I think he could do something very surprising in doing something very subtle in terms of a charitable aspect or whatever, using some of his network, which he still has got, to do things. But he needs to be, that's his problem for himself, he needs to be back in the fold. And all he's doing is trying to knock on a bolted door, that will never reopen for him. The problem all these people have is that whatever they do to rehabilitate themselves, it's a story. And as soon as it's a story, everybody's looking to see whether that's going to fail or succeed. The fact is, somehow you've got to do it in such a way that it's so low-key now, in a very different world where everybody's got a phone in their hand that can actually take 4K film. There is no privacy. So how do you do things when no one can see the join? Because that's great PR. When something has happened, you think, how the hell did that happen? No, you haven't named the publicist, you haven't named the image consultant or whatever. It's sort of, by osmosis, it's changed. And that is the future of PR. The fact is now that, certainly everybody's talking about it, you've got to find a way of going through that change and getting help without it becoming a story.
Right, we need to rattle through our quickfire questions to both guests. Whoever wants to go first, you can jump straight in. So the first question is, we're talking about birthdays earlier, so which royal do you think would throw the best birthday party?
Oh, I know, without a doubt. Has to be Beatrice or Eugenie. And the reason I say this is because of that amazing story from a few years ago where she apparently tried to knight Ed Sheeran at one of the parties. It was Beatrice tried to knight him and she was trying to knight James Blunt and she cut Ed Sheeran in the face. I'm not suggesting that getting cut in the face at a party is a sign of a good one, but I want to see everything that led up to that moment. I want to be at that party.
If you come back from a party with a scar and you've been with Ed Sheeran, two princesses and James Blunt, that's a good party.
It's a good story.
Sarah Phillips.
OK.
Great husband, Mike Tyndall.
Yeah.
Very, very down to earth. Lives not very far from me.
Sounds like you're wrangling after an invite.
Yeah.
And they get on with it with such humour, and they're very happy together. They've got a great crowd of people. That's the party I'd want to be at.
Excellent. Front page of The Sun this week, Prince George is learning to fly, aged 11 years old. But which royal would you want to take control of a plane in an emergency?
Somebody who could fly the planes is maybe Prince Andrew. Because it's about self-survival.
Oh, yeah.
He's a very accomplished military pilot. So if I was in a helicopter, and it was heading downwards, he'd be trying to
There is redemption for the Duke of York.
He would save himself first.
Yeah, but that means you have to be hanging out with him either before or after, and I don't know. I think Harry or William, they've got aviation training, helicopters, planes, it's all the same, right?
Yeah, that'd help you out. And our final question to both of you. We're talking about reputations and images here. I mean, which royal has the worst reputation or image? Is it Harry, Meghan, Andrew, or another?
Andrew. It's got to be Andrew.
There's no doubt about it.
No coming back for Andrew.
No.
Andrew is at the bottom. OK, well, thanks very much, guys. That was awesome. It's great to have your views on, both of you. It's very interesting, so thank you. Well, that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like the show, please let us know in the comments. We do read them. And subscribe to the channel so you never miss a show.